Get those earbuds in your ear, man.
No kidding. Right as we're starting,
Good timing.
my high technology, the dog starts barking like crazy right outside the door. So
Actually, I'm kind of envious because one of the things I've intended to do and just haven't done it is figure out how to get some earbuds to link to my laptop and the wireless ones. And I've been lazy and I just plug this in because I'd rather not have these cans on my head, but we make do. Good to see you, Joel. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing okay, Mike. How are you?
Very good. And I mean, time's going to fly. It always does when we chat about stuff. So I want to just launch into it and not babble too much. But when Gina mentioned the topic, because I had something in mind and then she mentioned your topic, and I think they tie together very naturally because inevitably we would talk about one or the other. But I'm glad you want to talk about, what are we talking about, Joel?
Soft secession. Our favorite guy, Steve Turley, did a video, and he talked about how not necessarily a hard secession. There's talk about that, but how America is going through like a soft secession. People are seceding in a lot of different ways, where they live. You know, the laws that counties are making, that kind of all kinds of different ways in which you can call it seceding. That's the nice way to put it. You can call it balkanizing. You can call it tribalizing, which is not so nice and it does not bode well. But yeah, just as our values start differing from region to region or place to place, or really around where I live, you and I live, it's neighborhood to neighborhood. You know, my part of San Diego County is much more conservative than other parts, and it's just completely different. It's a completely different world 30 miles down the road. It just is. So, yeah, so I thought that would be an interesting thing to kick around a little bit.
Well, the reason it makes sense to me to cover this, because what I wanted to, initially what I was thinking about is just what's going on right now. The indictments of the leading Republican candidate, right? We live in a country where we have elections and we've become a two-party system, and that's for better or for worse. It's what it is. It's a two-party system. And this obnoxious rabble rouser has commandeered one of those parties, and
how dare he?
Right. Yes. And succeeded and rose to the very top, right? The highest political office on the planet, right? And did good, right? Did a few things wrong, but for the most part, he did everything he said he was going to do, right? He's like set just a record. About. Yeah, he set a record probably. I would say if you compared his campaign promises to every other presidential campaign list of campaign promises, that he could tick off far more than others did, right?
Life was pretty good.
Oh my gosh.
When he was president, you know?
When life is good, you have leftist CNN economists saying, this is the greatest economy I've ever experienced, right? This is the greatest economy that's ever existed. Life is better than it's ever been before, is what they're saying. And like,
yes, impeach him.
Get rid of that guy. Life is too good.
We can't have this.
We can't handle
life good in America. We've got a revolution to things that people have got to be hurting. People got to be dissatisfied. We got to make them turn against each other. We can't have it if this bombastic fool is making life good for everyone.
Peace and harmony, forget that. We want war, right? Exactly. We had no new wars. We had Islamic states signing treaties with the Jewish state. Like what? Like we had him walking across the demilitarized zone to a dictator and not getting killed.
Yes,
it's like
exactly.
This guy was shaking up the world order. But so now we live in a former republic or whatever. When you indict your political opponent, the United States has literally shifted. It's like this seismic shift in history in our country. And so it's like when I do my bird's eye view of the lifespan or the history of the United States, I look at 2016 as that shift, right? It was 2016, which was like the rock cracking the veneer, right? If you've got a big glass window and one rock hits it, and it doesn't just make a little ding. This one made a ding and a crack is separating, and that window will never be whole again. There's no way. I mean, maybe there's technology these days to fix an existing crack and you can't see it, but I don't know. But for the sake of the metaphor,
Right.
our lives will never be the same, and it's a good thing. Steve, I think it was Steve Turley, our friend that you just mentioned, used a metaphor, or maybe it was Doug Wilson. Actually, I think this preacher guy, he said,
Oh, I know exactly who you're talking about. I know Doug Wilson very well. As a matter of fact, he did a video recently too that I was going to bring up. But go ahead.
he's a recent discovery for me. I think it was YouTube that recommended, and now I have friends that know his son and stuff like that, and so we're kind of connected. And I've interviewed him once, and I'm going to interview him again.
Oh, really? Oh, I'd like to see that.
Oh yeah, Doug Wilson is a force for God.
Oh,
and
he's smart. That guy is. Yeah,
the guy knows the word, and he's not just biblically literate. He's not just well versed, but he's paying attention to the most crucial things happening in the world today and addressing them. Right? He's on the cutting edge. He's saying this is what God's doing through all this garbage, and this is how we should be position ourselves. But I think it was just a couple of days ago, one of the videos of his I listened to, he used the metaphor of when you. My mom is a nurse; she would know better what the terminology is. But there's this fluid that you have to drink when you go to get a body scan for an X-ray.
And I watched the same video. Yeah.
Okay, so he uses that metaphor, and it's like Trump is that colored dye. He's not the cancer. Yes. He's not the problem. He's the colored dye you drink and expose all the cancer that already exists. Right,
and
all the problems.
Radioactive stuff you drink, because I've just went through my cancer. I'm still going through my cancer thing. It's radioactive. They put that stuff to you in a big metal needle, and it comes in a lead box. Yes.
Right.
That metaphor was pretty good. He used another metaphor in there too, if you remember, about a theater. How he's in a theater, and I'm kind of getting ahead of stuff, but orcs are rappelling down. Everybody's in the theater. Yes. Orcs from whatchamacallit,
Lord of the Rings.
Towers, Lord of the Rings. Yeah. Are rappelling down, but the people on stage are still talking about, hey, we need to upholster the seats in the theater because they look terrible, or those curtains are not, and everyone else is screaming because they're being attacked by orcs. So as a metaphor for the Republican leadership.
Yeah, the Republican leadership are, and he was comparing the debates, right? The primary debates to the old way of doing things. And he said something like, you don't bring things back to the way they used to be by just doing what you used to do. Essentially, you can't anymore because it's been disrupted. You have to elect a disruptor to fix things. Right. You can't just elect one of those people that you used to have all along that was part of the system. And the denial of the true plight or the true trauma that's been exposed by that radioactive, Trump.
And it's funny, you mentioned 2016. I would go all the way back. Well, actually, I go all the way back to Woodrow Wilson, and some people go all the way back to Abraham Lincoln. But I would say when it really started, what set up 2016, I think was 2008, because you remember, President Obama said, we are 2 weeks away from fundamentally changing the United States of America. And he delivered. I mean, Trump delivered on a lot of his stuff. Obama delivered on that. And when you think about what the fundamentals are of the United States, one of them is due process. One of them is a right to counsel. One of them is, fair election, whatever you want to call them. Whatever you want to call it. So I think, and honestly, it was also the acquiescence of the populace to that, just because to say, I'm not racist, I'm going to vote for him. We have to vote for this man. Otherwise, which wasn't true. We wouldn't have been racist if we didn't vote for him. But, we have sat by passively and taken so much of this that you're right. Now the only thing that can take care of is someone coming in with a sledgehammer or the radioactive dye or whatever you want to call it, and breaking things down. But like Wilson and Turley both said this, essentially the same thing. It's not, and you just said it's not going to be the same. We're probably going to end up balkanized anyways, and soft and hard secessions all over the place. And you're right, it's not going to be the same because we've let it go too far.
Yeah.
So,
But the hope or the light, right? So since God is in control, he's not surprised by this stuff. It's not actually out of his control. Nothing can be out of his control. By definition, he is sovereign. And so what he's doing is using these circumstances to expose evil, right? We're seeing that true evil does exist. And whenever true evil is exposed, it glorifies God, right? Like, see, evil exists, therefore good exists, and good can't exist without the one who is good, right? And that's the quick apologetic line. But as I've been thinking and listening to Doug and Turley and some other influencers, it's like, okay, most everybody is saying Trump is going to win, except kind of Doug, right? Doug had he has a podcast or a blog that he writes, and he's like, he sees it's possible, but however, since they're cheating already, they're still going to be cheating, and we don't know what the actual final result will be. But if you do go the old way by the polls, Trump's going to win. He can't lose, right? That's like everybody's, even people that were like, I listened to Tim Pool a lot, and he was on that same bandwagon. However, so the cheating, we're going to see it's blatant already. Indicting your political opponent is cheating, right? That's the most glaring cheating. It's election interference, and it's cheating in the upcoming election. That one that hasn't happened yet is already being cheated.
Right.
But even if all the cheating fails and the numbers come across, and I think there's a high likelihood that the numbers will come across that Trump is going to win in a landslide, or it'll be considered an electoral college landslide or something. They're trying to get him off the ballot. I don't think that'll work. I think the Supreme Court may step in. But even, let's just flash forward to that day, November, whatever, 2024, or a month later, or whenever they decide to stop arguing, whenever they decide to stop suing in the Supreme Court. Right.
So when the Supreme 2000,
right, when the Supreme Court steps in and settles all this nonsense, if and when it ends up being Trump, it doesn't solve anything, right? It solves a lot, but it doesn't solve everything. The country, here's where the secession discussion really ramps up and accelerates, I believe, because our federalist system gives essentially every governor is the president of their state, right? Every governor has autonomy, a certain amount of autonomy.
We're in bad shape. You and I are in bad shape.
So when I think about like the one that the secession story, or the secessionist map, if you will, that stands out to me is Idaho. Speaking of Doug Wilson, I think if it's going to happen, that is, I envision, when you look at those maps that show the counties rather than the states, right? You have red states and blue states, but when it breaks down to counties, that's the kind of secession that I'd never thought about before this period of time. I never thought that counties could secede and join adjoining states, which would change the map of the United States. And if that does happen, seems like there are some places that are really, really seriously pursuing it. If it does start happening, I think eventually that map of the counties, those little blue dots, will be the former blue states, right? All of the red will migrate to the red states nearest to them. So California will actually just be a couple separate pockets. It'll be San Francisco, California, and Los Angeles, California. And the rest of the state will be, here's New Oregon, or New Idaho. Here's New Idaho and New Nevada and New Arizona. Arizona will spread west, and Nevada will spread west, and Idaho will spread west.
Sadly, Michael, you have to include San Diego in that too.
Okay. Oh.
Because San Diego went blue about 5 years ago, and now we're becoming a mini LA. We have the tents lining the overpasses on the freeway. We have the poop on the sidewalks.
And you're right by the border. You're closer to the border.
Yeah. But no, you're right. And the best description I've ever heard of California is not divided between Northern and Southern California. It's divided between Eastern California and a little sliver of coastal California.
Yeah.
But that's where all the people are, because if you're in California, that's where you're going to live.
Yeah.
I don't want to live in El Centro, or even our son is living in Temecula. Well, Marietta, it's 100 degrees and dusty, but that's the most conservative part. Landmass wise, county wise, size wise, California is very red. Population wise, that little sliver along the coast, 20 miles inland from the coast, is highly deep blue. And but they, again, that's like Oregon with Portland. Portland dominates Oregon. All
Yeah.
those other counties, and nothing's crazier than Portland.
Mm,
And
right.
so, but the rest of the country is heading there. The big cities are all heading to be Portland. San Francisco's right on its heels. So, but I think you're right. I think that's the map. That's going to be the example that the template is going to follow. Everyone's going to follow. These counties are just not going to put up with the craziness and all the stuff coming from the big cities, and they're going to secede.
I mean, it's the nature of, I mean, because this is unprecedented, right? We as humans, we have this lifespan, 70 to 60 to 100 years, whatever it is,
Right.
And we come into life thinking things have always been this way, but we don't realize it's a short span.
Yes.
The United States is still a baby. I remember when I went to Europe on a trip, and I'm walking through 2,000-year-old temples. 2,000-year-old. I can go to the east coast of the United States and walk through 200-year-old buildings,
Right.
And think that's old. Oh, these buildings are old. I'm like, this ain't nothing. And so the United States is a unique new system, this constitution thing that God inspired. It's like, it's still there. It still exists. And there's so many unprecedented things that could lead to. And that's what our system is. Over time, we used to not have a mechanism to make slavery illegal. We used to not have that mechanism, but because of the Constitution of the United States, we have that, right? It's the Constitution, that good thing that led to a good outcome that had to eventually work its way out through our system. And so secessionism looks like something that's within our Constitution that hasn't been tried to at all, really. And so how granular can secession get? And that's kind of what I was meditating on as I knew that this was something we're going to talk about. It's like, okay, when I see that new map of New Idaho or whatever it's called, the New Idaho,
Greater Idaho, yeah,
the Greater Idaho, that new map, if that happens, that state, the state of Idaho, becomes the third largest state in the United States, Alaska being the largest, Texas being the second largest, and then New Idaho or Greater Idaho would be the next largest state. And if that becomes a trend nationwide, then that county map becomes the state map eventually, right? That county map of all that red, because in our Constitution, we recognize that a nation is not just people. As you're talking about in California, the concentration of population is like that little strip. But states are more than people. States are industry, infrastructure, resources. There are so many more other things to a nation. That's why the popular vote isn't what chooses the president, because then all the most populous states would rule the country, and they kind of do that.
But then, right, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're right. The Constitution is the thing that gives us that possibility, things to explore, which is exactly why that's what this election coming up is all about. And I believe Doug Wilson said, the election we have is about whether or not elections will matter in the future, whether or not this Constitution will exist or not. And we've had Supreme Court justices, late Supreme Court justices, say, I wouldn't do the Constitution again. I wouldn't recommend the Constitution for it. The Constitution is getting in our way of doing what we want to do, of saving the planet, of whatever else, whatever modifier of justice you want to call racial justice, economic justice, whatever. The Constitution is getting in our way. So really what you're saying is true, which means that's the fight that's ahead of us. If we don't end up with two separate Americas, old America and new America, where new America just has completely rejected the Constitution, old America are all the counties that seceded, and somehow, because we're not landmass, we wouldn't be a line. There would be pockets.
Yeah.
And how is that going to work? Right.
And that's the exact mental process that I kind of
Right.
went through. It's like, okay, it's not north and south. You can't do that, right?
No.
There's no way to do that, especially the way society has developed, where you can live anywhere, and have your belief system. And so, when I think about how Steve Turley, and the thing that Steve Turley, one of the greatest values that he brings is his, well, not just his positivity, his depth of knowledge about history, about American history, about legal processes, and about trends. He follows trends, and trends are big things. They're not things that happen instantaneously. Right. It's like you follow the trends, and all of the trends bode well, right? We happen to be in a really crazy time, but the trends are boding well. For example, the demographic trend, like the people who love Jesus are having more babies because the Bible says so, and
Right.
the people who hate God think humans are a plague on the planet, so don't have babies. It's like, okay, you believe that, go ahead, believe that nonsense, and you will disappear, and you'll get smaller and smaller. And so one of the trends he's saying that's happening right now, it's not just populations from blue states migrating to red states, but it's migrating from blue counties to red counties, right? So this migration, the population shifting, that's a trend as well. And that's what led me to believe that it seems, that the county secessionism to other states, when the first one happens, it'll be kind of, I think, a breaking of a flood, right? If a county is able to do that and actually goes through with it, it will embolden across the nation other counties to pick up that same legislation, whatever process they used, and so we'll start to see states changing shape. Right, we'll be looking at a map every now and like, oh, that county seceded. Now Michigan now has less land because it went this way or whatever.
I would totally agree with that, but there is one wild card: those orcs rappelling down the theater. If and when all this stuff happens, and I think Doug Wilson mentioned this. He goes, the left is not going to throw up its hand and say, "Oh well, we gave it our best shot. I guess we lost. I guess we'll just let the Constitution go, or we'll let those counties succeed in seceding, whatever you want to."
Yeah, that's good.
But they're not going to do that. These are Marxists. These people, they don't want peace, like we were just joking about at the beginning. They don't want a peaceful resolution of this. They want everything to break down so they can build their utopia where they're in control. So yes, I would say the trend is, people who believe in God and who are having babies, and people who don't are not. But those babies, as they grow up, are still going to be indoctrinated with a lot of really evil stuff. And ask a lot of parents who sent their kids supposedly to a Christian school, so they would be immune to all this. And then at the Christian school, they give it all this woke indoctrination. So either way, it's going to be the thing that's going to be different, I think, is this little bubble, this little window you're talking about, 2,000-year-old, all through history. We're like a little pause in time here, the last 200 years.
Peace and prosperity.
Peace and prosperity. You talk to Jordan Peterson. He said about 1895 is when prosperity happened. Before that, people had nothing. It's only really been the last 120, 130 years that we've had this prosperity, and it's just a little burp in history. It's not the norm, and it can go away. So, and I'm not really doing a gloom here. I'm just arguing for people to wake up. Yeah. Those orcs are rappelling down. My analogy is always, we're standing on the deck of the USS Arizona on December 7th, and the Zeros are coming in, and some of the officers are on the deck saying, "I thought I told you to paint that gun whale," and the mattress in my stateroom is too firm. Can you get me? But there's zero. Why are you so concerned about these Zeros coming?
What are your orders? Why are you not obeying them?
Yeah. Oh, don't we? I don't want to fight that war. I don't want to fight that hot war. Well, they're coming in anyways, whether you're going to fight it or not. So you're either going to get sunk or you're going to fight back. And you might get sunk anyways, but at least you fought back, right? Yeah. So and I think that's what Doug Wilson and Steve Turley talks about this time, the feckless, or whatever feckless means, leadership we have, not only in republicanism, but also in evangelicalism and Christianity as a whole. Everybody's worried about, the the upholstery on the seats in the theater, or the painting of the boat, while the orcs are repelling and the zeros are coming in. And one thing Doug Wilson said, he goes, "Do you know what time it is? Do you know what time you're in? It doesn't seem like you do." So we'll see.
That particular video of Doug that we keep referencing, and I'm
we
glad
we didn't start off to do this.
Well,
Gina's probably got the wrong title on.
no, it's a pleasant surprise that you have listened to that, because for the audience out there, we didn't know. We both watched the same video, and we just found out that we watched, and I've watched it a couple of times.
Yeah, if you want, it's called "The Election We're Not Going to Have."
Yeah, and it's on Blog and Mablog. I think that's Blog.
I saw it on I saw it on YouTube, but yeah, it's on.
Well, Blog and Mablog is it's a YouTube channel as well as a blog. So what he does is he writes a blog, and then he posts it on that platform, the written blog platform, and then he just reads it to camera and posts it on YouTube. So
that's not an exciting video. He's just basically reading, but yeah.
Well, it's not exciting if it's not exciting if you're bored by a sharp assessment of what's really going on. If you're bored by an assessment of what's really going on, oh well, don't watch it. But if you want to be at the cutting edge of what's, he's just an incisive intellect. He gets cut straight to the chase. So that's all that Doug Wilson praise. But the thing that he says, there's another video I watched where he does an interview with a couple of guys, and they ask him a question that he starts explaining what's going on, or describing what's going on in his community in Moscow, Idaho, through Christ Church, the church that he's been pastor of for 40 years. And he gives some testimony of people who come in from outside. And one of the testimonies was a guy who came to visit for some event, to visit his family that's there, and a guy who came from California to visit, an old guy. And the guy was, attending services and some events that they were doing. And the guy commented to Doug, he goes, "I didn't know this America still existed." He said to Doug, "I didn't realize this America still existed." And Doug says that's only been in the last 40 years. It's this process of when you apply scripture to every level of your life, all of God for all of life, or all of scripture for all of life. That's like one of his mottos, is when the fathers are learning how to actually be fathers, and husbands are learning how to actually be husbands, and community members are learning how to be community members according to the biblical pattern that he's instilling through his teaching and process, that the whole community is being transformed. It's like Moscow is like a little tiny blue dot in a red state, and everybody was, until they came to town, all those blue diehards didn't have anything to worry about until they landed in Moscow and started taking over the town, and then the protests started, right? And what that showed me, as I was thinking about, that needs to be replicated. And that's what he's saying. If it can happen here, it can happen everywhere, right? And so it's a model, like it's a proof of concept, right? This biblical lifestyle of peace and harmony and loving one another and happy families and joy and celebrating everything, that's a reality in Moscow, Idaho, and it's growing and expanding. And so in my conversation that I have coming up with him in a couple of weeks, one of the things I want to talk to him about is I want to be like a conduit to try and do that in my particular town, right? Starting with me as a man, as a husband and a father. I need to, there are things in my life that I'm not doing right. And then from that point out, how can I be, and I know ways I can affect my community. I already have a good reputation in my community. So, all right, there's something noisy here.
Oh, I thought that was the end credit music or something. We've got about 40 seconds to go.
That's your cue.
I thought, he's programmed some fade out music. Wow, Mike's on top of it.
I don't know if it's a garbage truck or if my
kids. You're an editor and a producer, director, whatever.
All of the above. Yeah. Like I said, it was going to go fast. Joel, this was very, this was fun and inspiring. I could go another half an hour, but I'm going to give you the last word. What good do you have to say to our audience?
Well, I like what your analogy is, that we can do it through peace and harmony. I hope that's the way, because my father's generation had to do it through war. So right. I hope that, but that's the choice we have. It all depends on how faithful we are to the truth that we know.
Amen. And it is an ongoing spiritual war. So pray and act.
Pray and act.
Good to see you, Joel. Love you,
too, Michael. All right.
Bye, everybody.
Next time.